Okay, perfect. Okay, cool. So I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. Some people may join virtually or in person as they trickle in, but I kind of wanted to ask, like I do have some like interactive activities that could be fun to work with. I had originally intended them to be for a group, but if you're comfortable with it, we can just kind of go through them together if you want to get that kind of creative writing practice.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Cool, cool, cool. So I'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Jay. I am a poet and a data scientist with a background in public health with data science. And I also have been performing poetry since I think since I was 16 or 17, so about like 14 years of like writing and performance. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm excited to be delivering this workshop. This is my second workshop, so yeah, just glad to be here and don't know if you wanted to take a second to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, my name is Raina. I've taken a couple classes with the Future Lab. I think it's my first virtual one, and I'm just curious about what was going on with this AI stuff.
One second, I couldn't hear you super well. Let's see if we can get the sound a bit boosted. One second. Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Possible too if we can like swap the sound. I can just go on Zoom and like if that would be easier. Hey, can you reintroduce yourself one more time? Sorry.
I'm Raina. I've taken a couple classes with the Future Lab. This is my first virtual class, I believe.
One second. You're good. Can you hear us?
I can you guys.
Okay, you're still kind of low volume. Yeah. Okay, yeah, let's one second. Yeah.
Recording in progress.
You might want to. All right, how does that sound? Okay, that mutes me. So maybe if we turn the mic off or whatever the echo is. Okay, is that okay for this? Is that okay for the sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. Did he want some more tea? Me too. Want some more tea? I want some more tea. That is hot. Okay. Mhm.
Um, Last winter, did I have my purple with
Oh, there we go. Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I was asking, Raina, would you be able to introduce yourself one more time, just now that the sound is working?
My name is Raina. This is I think I've taken a couple classes with the Futures Lab. This is the first virtual one I'm taking, and I'm
Hmm.
just interested in learning about this AI stuff and concerned to port.
Awesome. Cool, cool, cool. And I think we've got our first in-person person here as well. So another attendee. Hey, how's it going? No, you're totally good. So you're actually good. We were just introducing ourselves. My name is Jay. I'll be facilitating. Raina is also on virtually. And whenever you're settled, if you want to introduce yourself, you haven't missed anything. We're starting from the beginning. So yeah. So what's your name? Pamela Jackson. Pamela Jackson. Awesome. Nice to meet you. My name is Jay. I was just telling Raina, so this is my second workshop with the Future Arts Lab. And the last one was more kind of like geared towards resume building for federal workers using digital tools. And this one is more of like a creative spin of using machine learning as like a kind of like writing tool in like practice in an ethical sense. So since we actually have more than one person here, I think we can like we'll work through the interactive activities as well, and then this will be recorded for anyone who wants future access. But I'll switch my screen back to the slides. And so what I wanted to do too was kind of like combine some workshops that I've done in the past to give you some background and then work a bit more into some writing exercise using the machine learning tool. So the first is more thinking about symbols and how you can use symbols as a writing tool to kind of explore writing confessional poetry or anything or whatever your literary medium is. And then the second one will dive a little bit more into the machine learning piece and specifically kind of how I've used it for surrealism and writing for that kind of approach. So before we get started, I was thinking about a little icebreaker exercise where if people are interested, if you're interested, if you know your sign and wanted to uh, and wanted to sorry, if you know your sign and want to say what your sign is, feel free. Or if you want to kind of describe the signs that are on the screen, you can do that as well if you know what those are. So I'll start. I'm a Taurus. You can see it on here as like the second one. And I don't know, Raina, if you know what your sign is astrologically.
I'm a Scorpio.
Okay, Scorpio, cool. So we're sister signs. Taurus and Scorpio are like sister signs. Do you know what any of the other like signs on this screen are?
Is that the Pisces on the end?
Not quite, but I think the first time I looked at that one too, I thought it was a Pisces. That one is Cancer, and
Okay.
then the first one is Aries, and
Aries. Okay.
Taurus, and then we have I think actually that one is
Libra.
Gemini.
Gemini.
And
Okay.
so the reason I like using this icebreaker is because when you look at these, even though like they're just kind of like symbols, we kind of have a shared understanding of what those symbol means, you know, like their astrological signs. And oftentimes when people use their astrological signs, it helps kind of symbolize different personality traits and ideas that people have about who a person is. So you said you're a Scorpio. What kind of traits or ideas or characteristics do you normally associate with like a Scorpio?
Loyalty,
Okay, any
revenge,
others?
revenge.
Yeah, loyalty and revenge, which is funny because people say the same thing about Tauruses. It's kind of like why they say we're sister signs, like kind of doing the same thing from like different angles. And so Tauruses, you know, like I often get stubborn, loyal, vengeful, cozy, hungry. And so even though like these are just very, you know, like they're just images, they're really small images, they're packed with a lot of meaning about how we understand people and how we understand the world around us. Knowing what these other signs are, you know, like we've got Aries, we've got Gemini, we got Cancer. What other ideas do you usually kind of like associate with those signs? Either one that you want to kind of either based off what you understand or based off of people that you know.
From what I know, Gemini is like two different people. Like people say they bipolar.
Yeah. Like very back and forth, like one idea and then the next. So yeah, and the reason I kind of bring these up is again, when we're thinking about symbols, that's what a symbol is designed to do. It packs a lot of meaning into a very, very small piece of information. And sometimes we may have different ideas about what symbols mean, but one thing that is really powerful about them and that we'll talk about is that they're a way for us to kind of like share meaning. Even though we may have different ideas, they help us meet in the middle about what different things can mean. And so, kind of what goes hand in hand with symbols and symbolism are the ideas of myths. Joseph Campbell is a guy who he wrote this book called The Hero's Journey, which discusses archetypes and myths, and essentially the idea that archetypes are symbols of how we understand different kind of personalities in the world, and we use myths to kind of tell large stories about how these personalities, human and otherwise, have built the world around us. So this quote that he uses is really indicative to me of that, as far as saying myths are public dreams and dreams are public myths. So you have this very personal idea of like these things that people are dreaming, and then this universal idea of what a myth means as far as constructing a public dream, which you see in like a lot of different stories, creation stories, different religions, and different literary works as well. So part of what I've been able to kind of what I use symbolism for when I'm writing is from this perspective of kind of transformational confessionalism, which is this idea that by using symbols to tell a story to get us to a shared meaning, I can transform myself by sharing, and the person who receives the information can be transformed by receiving. That is something that myths and symbols work really well in with poetry. And yeah, I'll work through some examples of what that looks like. I'll work through maybe some exercises. And then, if interested, maybe towards the end, we can also do like a personal share if we end up getting any writing done today, but no pressure. And also, too, like since this is more conversational, if at any point you want to like stop me or ask a question or anything like that, just let me know.
Okay.
So, first, starting with transformational confessionalism. So it's the idea that by sharing our lived experiences, we can motivate ourselves to change and grow. Some of the different kinds of characteristics of transformational confessionalism are these ideas called the poetry of the persona. So, this idea that when you're confessing from your lived experience. So, you're writing about yourself. Another component of transformational confessionalism is privacy. Typically, the things that you're disclosing in a confessional poem are things that you're not necessarily discussing with people every day. It may be something you're journaling about, it may be secrets that you're keeping, things that are usually very guarded, but can kind of be revealed safely through poetry, through writing, and through literary work. What that also goes into is shared revelation. I was talking about the idea that symbols are a way for us to share meaning with each other. And so when you're using poetry through the lens of transformational confessionalism, the goal is to get the reader and the person reading, or the poet and the person receiving the poem, to reach a shared understanding about what the symbols mean, so that they can also transform and grow from what is being shared. And symbols, again, kind of go hand in hand with this idea of intense imagery, packing in meaning into images and symbols to creatively express these things that we normally may hold private, these things that we think about ourselves that help us share a revelation with others. So we're going to work through an exercise. Feel free to kind of like off the top of your head, off the dome, let me know what you think when you see these images. So here's the first one. This is a bat. So what do you think of when you see a bat?
Bites,
Bites,
blood,
bites, blood.
vampires,
What was the third one?
vampires.
Vampires. Yeah. So bites, blood, vampires, these kind of like, like a lot of horror films, dark imagery like blood, vampirism. Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. We'll go to the next one. This is a hummingbird. So what do you think about when you see hummingbirds?
Delicate, light, fast.
Yeah, delicate, light, fast. And that's actually, you spoke to something that I actually want to highlight. So with bats, we think, like darkness, caves, vampirism. But when we think of hummingbirds, we think light, flowers, like flitting. And so, in this kind of sense, bats and hummingbirds are symbols that kind of express opposing ideas, this idea of like dualism. And I wanted to focus on these two symbols because a couple of years ago, I went to Oaxaca, Mexico, with some friends, and their like kind of culture in their art, they use a lot of bats and they use a lot of hummingbirds because in their culture, hummingbirds represent, people that you love, dreams. They say if you dream about a hummingbird, then someone you love is thinking about you. Whereas like bats are kind of like, they're about caves, they're about like ancestry, they're about like kind of like the darkness and subconscious that we don't normally get to express. So in this way too, like when we think about opposites, some symbols gain meaning when you think about the opposite symbol that helps to explain it. What is this? You might feel free to guess and I'll let you know.
A maze.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a maze. Like, what do you think about when you think about a maze?
Lost.
Lost, twists and turns, made potential discovery, frustration.
Definitely frustration.
Yeah. And then what is think I know there's a kind of a bunch of different images, but mostly focusing on like the big like bull horn like horned creature here. What is that?
Something mythical.
Yeah, mythical. And specifically, it refers to the myth of the Minotaur. And the Minotaur in Greek myth is a creature that,
In that labyrinth.
yeah, it lives in the labyrinth, and it lives in the labyrinth more or less as a punishment for being, half human and
Mm-hmm.
half bull. And so kind of it being in the labyrinth is this idea of it being punished because it lives on the outside of society. It holds a marginalized identity. And so the symbolism of the bull being in the maze or the minotaur being in the maze is also sometimes a symbolism for what it means when you don't necessarily live like within kind of like majority society, when you
Mm-hmm.
hold an identity that isn't necessarily, part of like the power structure. It can feel like you're lost. It can feel like you're being frustrated trying to navigate a space that your identity was never given a roadmap for. And so even just going through those four different symbols, we like covered a lot of ground and we unpacked a lot of things. That's why symbols and images and myths are so powerful, because if you use them correctly, they can be used to tell these really grand stories. And when you think about a poem, most poems are really short. So you can tell a lot, you can share a lot, and you can get people to a common understanding in a very kind of like straightforward and short way. And so I know I've talked a lot about symbols and how poems can be used and how they work and how they function in a poem. But now I want to kind of think a little bit more about like what it actually means to use symbols in the writing process. So for here, I really want to focus on this idea of shared meaning, particularly when it relates to like showing and telling. So, telling is very much, like I give you something like we were doing recently, I give you the symbol, I tell you what it's about. But oftentimes when you're writing, you're rarely going to be in a situation where you, as the writer or the poet, are going to be able to talk with and guide your readers through what all of your symbols mean. So you're not always going to be in a position to tell. You have to be able to show. And part of the part of the challenge and the interesting thing about like the craft of poetry and using symbols is that people might pull different meanings from the exact same symbol. Um, but at the same time, if you use them really well, or if you really are understanding, have a pulse of the culture that people are kind of coming from and their background, they can be a powerful way to meet ground by creating a shared meaning between people. This is why they're so good for storytelling because they can help you create a common message for your audience to follow, whether you're writing a poem, a short story, a song, etc. This kind of leads into the overall idea of transformational confessionalism, where you can use symbols to turn the personal into the universal. So even though you may be talking about things autobiographically, talking about things that happen to you personally, using symbols and the tool of shared revelation, you can make that personal experience resonate with other people, no matter what their background is. So I'll stop there and think, like, what are some examples, like, what are some stories, books, movies, whatever that like you've read or experienced where it may not have, it could have been something that was similar to what you experienced or something completely different from what you experienced, but because of the way it was conveyed and written and delivered, you were able to resonate with
Trying to think.
it. No
I
worries.
I read a lot of dystopian stuff, so like, huh.
And if it helps, I can like start off with an example too. So, when I was younger, I read, speaking of dystopian, I read The Handmaid's Tale for the first time in college.
Hmm.
And, and The Handmaid's Tale is very much, like about patriarchy and how like women are often oppressed so that they can serve like a very specific function for men as far as like having babies and giving birth. And, like I'm like, I'm a biological man. I'm never going to be able to like have kids in that way. But I resonated a lot with this idea and this frustration of trying to navigate your life when the power structure constantly wants to push you into this box and tell you that, like, no, you exist for this one thing. And the minute you try to break out of that, we're going to crack down on you. So even though it was like different symbolism and stuff that wouldn't necessarily be my direct lived experience, because of the symbology and the way that it was written, it still was able to resonate with me from a universal level. So if that kind of like helps as an example too.
Yeah, I get that. And with the like three category of women in that book, it's like every woman is all those categories. You're
Mm-hmm.
like the perfect woman. You got to be a lady and proper in public. And then you got to be the one having the babies. And that's like your most important thing about you is that you can't have babies to extend some man's legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Then if you're poor, you have to be all things, like the Marthas in the book. So yeah, I get that.
And it's interesting too, because like you can also see how like when you're forced to hold in that context of like being asked to hold those three kinds of identities that at the same time also conflict with each other. Cause like, having a body, being human, and like our human processes, those are kind of like very messy and not perfect things. So it's like, on one hand, you have the tension of being asked to be perfect. At the same time, it's immediately defeating because you can't, because no one can be perfect.
Hmm.
So I think that's something that we can all resonate with when we have these unrealistic expectations of what society wants us to be versus the reality of who we actually are. So if you're interested, there is a activity we can work through. This is a poem that I've written. I don't know if you have your phone, you can scan it and it'll pop up on your phone. If you're able to do that, let me know. And we can just take like a few minutes to read. It's a poem that I wrote from an experience I had like in Chicago. And yeah, if you want to take some time to read through it, I can give us maybe like It's a shorter read, but I can give us maybe like 2 minutes to read and then like digest a little bit, and you can just let me know when you're ready. So, first question is, are you able to access the poem?
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, cool. So if you want, I'll put like a little timer of like, let's say 3 minutes. And then after 3 minutes, we can come back together and just kind of, discuss. And I have some prompts that we can work through. So starting 3 minutes now.
Nobody said it.
All right, my timer went off. Do you need more time?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, cool, cool, cool. So next, so thinking about the poem itself, what symbols did you pick up on? What messages did the symbols send? And how did the symbols make you feel? So we'll start with the first question. What symbols did you find or what jumped out to you while you were reading?
Uh, all the descriptive things of summer, like the bugs.
Yeah, yeah. So like very seasonal imagery, very natural imagery. There were bugs, there were creeks. And so then the next question is like, what message did the symbol send?
Um, kind of calming at first.
What was that?
Kind of calming at first.
Calming. Okay, yeah.
And then we got to the part with the grandmother and got a little a little anxiety build up.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
was
yeah.
expected of you in a white world?
Hmm.
and
And
then get
then
back to being calming again.
how did the symbols make you feel? And I think you kind of spoke to it a little bit. So, in this one in particular, you kind of have this symbolism of like nature, how it can be calming, how you have this sense of like being very present in the moment. But then at the same time, those are immediately interrupted by these like anxieties of like navigating the world as like, like being a non-white person, being a black person, the idea that, this idea of being able to navigate this world this way is also carried down through families, through generations. And so these symbols and these poems work in the sense of like, being grounded in the natural world and then the seasonal change of things at the same, and that kind of being, yes, that's always going to happen. That's going to be what, that's the reality of things. And then this very personal anxiety of like experiences and stress and different things like that. And the symbols themselves kind of going back to like the hummingbird and the bat, of how they give each other more meaning and context by being placed so closely together. And then towards the end of the poem, returning back to that imagery of nature, which kind of wraps things up as like, no matter what's happening personally and how intensely and anxiously the things you're experiencing personally are, at the end of the day, the world is going to keep going. Like there's still going to be fireflies. There's still going to be a creek. There's still going to be, like nature here. So that's kind of what I was going for with writing that, and how, even if you may not necessarily have the specific lived experience, that's something that I think we can all resonate with. We get so wrapped up in what's happening with us personally that sometimes you forget like how calming it is to just step outside of that and be like, how does nature make me feel? What is the reality of this situation? So here is, we can't really trade right now because of like the virtual component. But one thing I do kind of want to do is, if you are comfortable with it, maybe instead of writing to a couple of lines, I want you to like think about a couple of symbols that show up in your life. They don't have to be like super weighty or anything super like, esoteric and spiritual, but just think about like things that show up in your day-to-day life. Um, Name a couple of them, and then maybe think about like what they mean for you as someone who's interested in writing, or maybe in your own writing, what are some things that recur or show up and how do they work. So I'll set another timer for like 2 minutes, and then we can discuss. Right, 2 minutes starting now for 1 to 5 symbols.
120 seconds.
Like 2 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Minutes. Oh, 3 minutes and 2 minutes is over 140 seconds.
No, 3 minutes, 120. Um, a minute.
Hmm? Thank you. Yeah. 30 seconds. All right. My timers went up. So, yeah. So, thinking about any of the symbols you were able to list, feel free to name a couple of them and then maybe what that symbol means for you. And then, like with your experience writing, maybe kind of how those symbols have worked and the things that you've written.
Okay, so one of them is like the clock
Okay.
because I'm always planning things and never getting around to it. I always feel like I have enough time for doing anything and always run out of time. Like time's a big thing. Like I never seem to have enough of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah. So,
I need more than 24 hours.
no, I definitely feel that. So a clock is kind of like a symbol for time, and that symbol also kind of like functioning as, a desire for there wanting to be more time, for wanting to be able to like kind of have time to do all the things that you want to do, which, is I think something we can all relate to. So do you have any others that you want to talk about?
Um, Colors like a rainbow
Yeah.
because I'm always trying to get into something creative. I like sign up for all these classes and never finish any of my artwork. But then I'll let it lay for a while, then I'll jump back to it. Um, I'd like to get more into it, but like when I see the color, just like you need to try making something. You need to be productive.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I think, I think it's actually really beautiful to kind of think of a rainbow as like a symbol for like the creative process and like trying to land on the creative process. Cause, like one thing I think about rainbows too is, like for there to be, there are so many different factors that have to line up for a rainbow to even show itself. It has to rain, like there has to be sunlight. You have to be in the right place to even see it. And
Right.
it's like, it's not this instantaneous thing. It's like one, the factors have to be there, and it still takes a while for it to reveal itself. So I think that's actually like a really cool way to think about the creative process as like a rainbow, because like we always see the colors and we're impressed with the end product, but we still forget how much has to line up to get there. So maybe for one more, and then I can share one if you have more that you wanted to share.
Like if you've ever read a comic strip when the character is like angry or cussing, you see the squiggle lines.
Yeah, yeah.
And that to me is like that's like I seem to always be in a haze sometimes.
Hmm.
Like I can never get clear thoughts. Like there's too many things going on in my mind that I can't focus on something like I need to.
Hmm.
That is, yeah.
Yeah, and and that'll kind of connect to the one I wanted to share. It's like this idea, like emotions themselves can be symbolic, like oftentimes when people talk about anger, it's less about like the actual anger itself, but more that like a lot of times when people experience anger, there's an immediate disconnect from the anger they feel like they're allowed to experience and the anger that they're actually experiencing within themselves. And, like even with those comic strips, that's exactly what those are about, like it's censoring anger because the
Mhm.
audience, like whoever is expressing it, just isn't allowed to express it the way that they probably authentically want to. And I think, when I think about like our American culture in particular, we are taught to downplay our anger, to suppress our anger, to censor our anger, when oftentimes like moving past a situation only happens when you allow yourself to really feel and express the anger the way you actually are supposed to. Um, and that kind of makes me think like the one symbol I would share is like, people are always like saying it's about poets. It's kind of like a stereotype that we're always talking about the moon. But like the moon is like one of my biggest symbols because for me, the moon is a symbol for the things that we don't notice during the day, the
Mm-hmm.
things that like, when and it's like still, like even though there's this thing that's happening at night, it's very bright, it's very illuminating. It's kind of like the opposite of the sun. So I love like probably too many times I'll use the moon as a symbol for like trying to express something that, I feel like I'm used to having to like hide, or something that I'm like, oh, this is something I have to be very like strategic about expressing, because it's something that I have to sit with and notice a little bit more before I can actually write it out. So just to review, symbols can transform. They can be used in a poem to share stories, create a common message, and also resonate and be relatable with your audience to share a personal revelation. They usually also have something that they want to communicate. So when you use a symbol, one thing that'll help is to think about the message you're trying to send and how that symbol might actually help your reader understand what you're trying to say in your poem. They can also be flexible. So, a symbol that has meaning for me might mean something very different for you. And you can play around with that by understanding, like trying to think about people's backgrounds, think about what symbols mean throughout different cultures, and flex the meaning of it a bit so that, again, it makes it things easier for you to resonate. And then again, when I think about poems and why people read poems and why I write poems, is because they are able to change the way people feel about things. And I think that's something that we downplay a lot, where, like our emotions are very powerful, they're very guiding. So things that can like affect our emotions, change them, allow us to see things from a different perspective, that can be a hallmark of a really powerful poem, and of a poem that's using symbols really effectively. So you can use them to set tone, create imagery, and prepare a reader for what the overall message of your poem is supposed to mean. Before I plug in my laptop and switch to um, the other part of this, that's going to be a bit more active. I did want to give this reading list that I developed. When I like first created this presentation. So, I love Audre Lorde. I think she is like a very powerful poet, who helps me connect with like, you know, identities that I don't necessarily belong to, but she's so good at telling stories. The power of myth I reference as far as like how myths are used, symbols are used. Um, Beloved, I read maybe like a year ago, and it kept me awake all night when I finished it, because it was
That's
like,
probably one of
one,
my favorite books by her.
yeah, sorry, what did you say?
That's probably one of my favorite books by her.
Yeah. It's really, I've been trying to go on a kick of like going through all of her books, and I started there. And yeah, it's just very powerful. Like the way she uses imagery and memory as like a symbol kind of connects everything together. I plugged in one of my poetry books because I had to. And yeah, so if you want to take a picture of this, or I think these will be available later, I'm going to plug in really quickly and then move to the next part.